Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending upon when you are watching this webinar. My name is Dave Nagel, and I'm very excited to share with my colleagues in Kearney School District, specifically elementary teachers who I worked with back in September, another piece, another professional learning webinar. This one, writing and implementing effective scoring guides. I'm going to call this part one because I'm going to come back and revisit with another piece here the next few weeks. But we're going to jump right in. Again, by this point in time, most of you had a chance to meet me or certainly watch maybe one of the other webinars, a little bit of my background, and specifically, most importantly, that I've spent a great deal of my career working with Larry Ainsworth's Common Formative Assessment Framework, both the original and now 2.0, and a lot of those pieces are really embedded here, which really are just bread and butter practices for quality assessment to drive instruction at all levels. So we're going to jump right in, and something that I've mentioned, excuse me, every time we've gotten together, any assessment really comes down to these 3 points. What's my purpose, and when do I have enough evidence to make an inference? And we do this all the time. We could be driving to work and realizing that if we don't turn left when we hit a stoplight, we're not going to make it on time because of the way the traffic's flowing. We're constantly making inferences from evidence. We should do the same thing in our classrooms. And our purpose comes from the unwrapped or uncovered standards. And we write our items, and then now we'll talk about our scoring guides to gather enough evidence to make an inference into student learning. If we look now on the additional handout that I provided, just the extra page, it's kind of the 4 steps of creating a quality short cycle assessment. We're down at step 4, generating the rubric or scoring guide that provides clear success criteria for both the students and teachers. If you see there, develop an objectively written scoring guide for any question or item. The students have been asked to construct a detailed response. We're looking at constructed response items. The students' results on the post-assessment provide timely feedback to teachers and students for where to go next. So the scoring guide should be guiding not just how the teacher scores it in terms of points, but guides him or her as well as the student about where their next learning step is. So why scoring guides? Let's look at a few reasons why these are so important. First one is that effective feedback will double the speed of learning. Not positive or negative, but effective feedback. And feedback's job is always to close the gap from where I am down at the bottom, where I am at the top, from where I need to be, and what I need to do to close the gap. And the more effectively written any directions for a task at all levels, and certainly not just in the classroom setting, it's going to help me as the learner empower myself to know where I need to go next. But then there's a couple other reasons. Far too often, students have gone through this, and I would imagine those of us who have been in the classroom longer than 5 minutes have done this. And far too often, students are in a situation where they're not exactly sure what they were supposed to demonstrate. And so we also, when we talk about writing the scoring guides, I want to challenge us to look at some existing ones that might have elements in them that have nothing to do with what's really essential or important within the standard. I was reviewing one with a group of teachers recently, and it was a high school writing example where they had to make a stickman figure on the side for X number of points. And I said, okay, it's not saying I have nothing against stickmen. I'm not, prejudiced against stickmen, I guess, but I didn't see anything in the standard that had to do with that. So I want to push us a little bit at times when we might take students away from what's essential because we get caught up in making our scoring guides too cumbersome, or they lose a great deal of potential objectivity. So I'm going to use that term scoring guide, and it is, for the most part, synonymous with rubrics. Detailed success criteria that make the performance expectations explicit and communicate in specific, objective terms exactly what the students need to include in their constructive responses on the common assessment, what we call these concise, empowering, short cycle assessments, to show they've achieved the learning intentions on which the assessment questions are based. So how do we construct them? Let's look at a few pieces. First of all, I pulled some elements from Larry Ainsworth's work. These are 6 considerations: how to define proficiency or mastery. What are the number of levels? And sometimes we might not have 4 levels. Sometimes we might only have 3. How will we name the levels? Will it be emergent, progressing, proficient? Holistic or analytic? What we mean by that, and I'm going to guide us through analytic. A holistic it's a 4, 3, 2, 1. No matter how many different elements were in there. I'm going to push us into going into more of the analytic, where we're going after each individual element. Some students might be able to cite the evidence, but they can't decide why it's strong. Or they might list something that was strong, but their citation was off. There should be a blend of qualitative things that are less measured and not as easily measured, but take the standard to the next level, and sometimes quantitative. You had 2 sources. You had less than 2 spelling errors. And is it a task-specific or a generic one? Might there be a scoring guide that students use every time they write a paragraph or a timeline, and then we add the content element into it? When we're looking at the difference between the two, and I'm going to push us more into the analytic, it's better for diagnostic and for feedback and to link instruction back to what's in my scoring guide. It does take a little bit more time to evaluate scoring when there's multiple aspects of student work that we're using at one time. The holistic, where there's just a general score no matter what, can score them faster, more for a summative assessment, and it does provide less of an opportunity to provide formative feedback, which is critical for learning and growth. Again, I'm going to push more to the examples around the analytic. So in your handout back from September that I provided everyone again, there's a little bit of an overview of this as well that you can refer back to, some things to consider when we're writing our scoring guides, and what to avoid and how to use. I'm going to walk us through a couple of these pieces, but I think it's critical if you look at those last 2 bullets under how to use. They're designed to move students to complete a status or a mindset and to diagnose solutions for learning gaps. Some things to avoid. We want to avoid subjective language. We want to demystify what students and teachers sometimes might have some murky expectations in there. And the problem is subjectivity. Now, we won't be able to squeeze all of the subjectivity out of every scoring guide. My wife will sometimes, rightfully so, give me some feedback that I throw the toothpaste tube away too soon. I say, well, you can't get it all out. I mean, you really can't. You could not get all of the toothpaste out completely. She says you need to try a little harder. I'm going to ask us to do the same thing when we're creating our scoring guides. We're not going to be able to get all of the subjectivity out, but we can certainly minimize a great deal. Some examples of this was a scoring guide that I pulled from an example that really highlights and permeates subjectivity. What is internalized understanding? Communicates clearly and with originality. That would be extremely biased. It's extremely subjective. Demonstrates general understanding of the major content and concepts. The only time we would want to, and certainly we want students to do that, but you would do that when you could fill in the blank. List 3 examples, cite why which one was the strongest and which one impacted another. So we might have these in mind. These are not what we want to provide students. So again, apologize, I went through that one kind of fast. This is exactly in your handout as well. But partial, limited, again, these are ones we want to avoid. So now let's look at a couple examples. One of the things that I also know is that creating quality scoring guides will help kind of balance this constant struggle teachers have between the time that we have, which is definitely minimal, and our desire to best support our students. One thing we can do is make sure we have what we call a hand-to-glove fit. What we see in the directions, we should see in the scoring guide. A clear alignment between the two. So we're going to look at a math example and then an English language arts example. Here's a constructed response for math. The chart below shows the equivalent values. Fill in the missing values and explain how you determine them. Success criteria means you correctly included the missing value, explained how the relationship between the numbers at the top and the bottom are used, and explain how the values were added to the table. So what we see in the directions, we see now in the simple scoring guide. 3 points that we can check off, not check off to put in the grade book, but check off and have the students check off as they're guiding themselves in finishing the work. The scoring guide isn't just for the teachers, it's for the students as well to guide their learning. Here's an English language arts, and again, we would use our scoring guides with an extended response. If it's a short response, like one word, we might not necessarily need one. But using the information from the 2 passages read in class, write a 3-paragraph argument that explains whether or not you agree that Rosa Parks should be considered the mother of civil rights. In your response, be sure to state your point of view, organize your ideas logically in your argument, use at least 4 unit vocabulary terms effectively in your writing, include a tight concluding statement to summarize your argument in your final paragraph. So that's what we've asked the students to do. Now when we see their scoring guide, it's right there. States the point of view, includes 2 pieces of reasons, 1 from each passage, and organizes their writing into an introduction body and concluding statement to relate to their opinion. Critical that we have that alignment between what is in the directions that you see here that I've just copied again, and that achieves success criteria. Anything less, they're not achieving. So one of the things I want to mention as well is we spend a lot of time, and I know my children have come home with scoring guides that describe achieving or proficient and then has a description of what less than proficient would be. I want to highlight us instead of doing that. Now, first of all, when we have exceeds, what goes above and beyond the achieves, the exceeds should be all of the achieves plus any of the following. And if you look here, each one of the exceeds is qualitative. It's not more. It's not that we want you to cite 5 examples instead of 4. That doesn't mean we couldn't do that sometimes, but I want to push us that the exceeds provides multiple ways that the students could improve whatever their work is, and it's all qualitative, and it's any of the following. If you meet all the achieves, maybe I really want you to work on supporting your argument. Maybe I want you to work on your opening statement, or maybe I want you to determine, but it's not like I have to jump through all 4 of these hoops to just become exceeds, and so it can't just be about, well, each one is worth a certain amount of points. Because you might have students that really, I want them to improve their argument, and that's where I want to guide them. But anything less, so we have our achieves, exceeds, anything less, you did 2 of the achieves. You did fewer than 2 of the achieves. Now we've got a simple, tight scoring guide that doesn't convolute. I don't want to have developing be a description of what the work would look like if it was kind of sort of good. I've given the students this, achieve success criteria. Anything less means you've only hit 2 of those bullet points. We'll look at one more example. The Roman Empire was a powerful civilization, yet it collapsed. Identify and explain 3 to 4 internal and external forces that contributed to the empire's decline. Analyze how those forces may have impacted each other, and be sure your writing meets the requirements stated on the scoring guide. So the key is 3 to 4 internal forces and how it contributed to the empire's decline, and writing guidelines on the scoring guide. Here's our entire scoring guide. We're asking the students to hit the achieves, identify and explain 3 to 4 internal external forces, and analyze how those have impacted each other, and your writing must include what the directions are on the scoring guide. So everything we see here in the achieves, in this part, I'm actually going to pause it here just for a second and just kind of emphasize this. Everything we see here, format my shape here. Apologize for not having this done before for the group. No fill. And then okay. And then boom. That's what we're asking students to do. So we can see here between this, identify 3 to 4 forces, analyze how they impacted each other, make sure your writing meets requirements stated on the scoring guide. Boom. Demonstrates, all those points are there. Exceeds, hits all of that, plus you make a comparison between the Roman Empire and a recent collapse of another civilization. Many civilizations have collapsed. Many countries have fallen. But developing and beginning is not described. You've hit 5 of those. You've hit fewer than 5 of those. And what we might say for this particular example, the feedback I would provide is it's really most important that you hit the first 2, because I'm not quite sure exactly what precise vocabulary means, but that's probably less important than your conclusion statement. So we can even have our criteria where you got to meet 5, but you got to meet these 3 to even be developing. But the point is we're keeping it simple and concise, not something like this, where we have exemplary, target, acceptable, unacceptable. Instead of saying develops and organizes ideas that are not necessarily connected, bottom line is your ideas aren't connected. I don't want you to say if they're uneven and ineffective, but I can do that one-on-one with the student. This convolutes the learning and mystifies not only the scoring but the grading. For example, under spelling and grammar, whenever I do collaborative scoring assignments, frequent errors in spelling and grammar distract the reader. It depends on who's reading it. We can't make that statement. It could distract us and not someone else. It could not distract me and someone else. How about less than 3 spelling errors? Something like that can be very quantitative, but what we've done is we've put a judgment in here that we can't make, because there's times when people could look past the spelling and grammar and other times they might not. So again, pushing us into simple and concise, that's very clear from the directions into the scoring guide, as opposed to this, is a great place that we can not only improve the quality of the scoring guide, but the quality of feedback we can provide students and the students can provide themselves. As always, I'm sure there are some questions. When you have them, please send me an email at davenagelvlplus@gmail.com. There'll be several other webinars that I'll be putting together shortly for the Kearney group and into the playlist. And I look forward to having conversations and dialogue this fall as we prepare to come back together right after the first of the year. Thanks for watching. Have a great rest of your day.